This is Tom Fox. I would like to welcome you to a special 5-part podcast series, Integrity Matters, Assessing the Corporate Compliance Climate in 2021, brought to you and sponsored by K2 Integrity. In this 5-part exploration, I'm joined by Snezana Gebauer, who is an Executive Managing Director and Head of Investigations and Risk Advisory Practice for the Americas. She advises leaders in business, finance, and government on risk management, investigations, and compliance, and is recognized for her significant experience in anti-corruption and investigative matters in Latin America, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Asia across every business sector. And Bob Brenner, who is the Global Co-Managing Partner and Chief Legal Officer at K2 Integrity. He has more than 25 years' experience in advising government and private sector clients as a monitor, investigator, and as consultant. Bob has been appointed and currently serves as a monitor or independent consultant on behalf of federal, state, and local government agencies, as well as international regulatory bodies. Bob and his team have also designed and implemented changes to compliance procedures, risk assessment procedures and processes, training protocols, and technology to close loopholes and provide both robust monitoring of future transactions and conduct. Over this 5-part series, we will assess the landscape resulting from the pandemic regarding compliance. We will consider what companies can expect from the new administration and its priorities. We will consider anti-bribery and anti-corruption compliance and enforcement in 2021. We will look at global trends impacting risk and compliance in 2021. And we will conclude with preparing your company for what is next. In this part 5, I'm joined again by Snezana Gebauer, and we look at preparing your company for what's next. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'd like to welcome you to our 5th and final episode in our podcast series sponsored by K2 Integrity on assessing the corporate climate in 2021. Snezana Gebauer. And we're going to look into the future and how you can prepare your company for what's next. Snezana, first of all, welcome back. So let me just start with, we have talked about a lot in this podcast series. It's been a fascinating exploration, but I was wondering if you could break it down into maybe a few key themes for the year ahead.
The reality is that the pandemic and the global economic downturn that the pandemic created in this past year is going to continue to define what's to come well after the vaccines are distributed and after we start returning to life as we knew it before the pandemic. So due both to the pandemic, to the economic downturn it caused, and to the change at the administration at the highest level in the United States, we talked about our expectations to have an uptick in enforcement of key U.S. regulations and in key areas. We expect new leadership at the DOJ, the SEC, the CFTC, and other regulators, and then we expect that to lead to changes in priorities, which have been consistent with those associated with prior Democratic administrations. For example, the Obama administration oversaw historically high levels of regulation, investigations, and corporate fines, all in the wake of the worldwide financial crisis of 2008, and we expect to see a similar reaction by the Biden administration. So the enforcement translates into enhanced focus on 5 key areas that we talked about. The first one was investigation and prosecution of COVID relief-related fraud. We talked about what companies can do to insulate themselves from being investigated and to protect themselves in case they come under scrutiny by U.S. authorities. We talked about increased focus on financial and corporate fraud, simply as a byproduct of the economic downturn caused by the pandemic. FCPA was an important topic. FCPA enforcement is expected to increase across the board, and so is cross-border collaboration in the pursuit of corruption with various other jurisdictions around the world. We expect the number of FCPA investigations to increase substantially over the coming years. Sanctions. We covered sanctions and talked about also a trend of increased sanctions cooperation and enforcement, as well as more robust multilateral approach to the enforcement of sanctions. And then finally, we touched a little bit about on ESG. The enforcement, we're expecting from the Biden administration an enforcement approach to climate change and other environmental issues. So environmental, social, and corporate governance are going to be focused on enforcement investigations and prosecutions generated by U.S. regulators.
One of the things that I've learned in the past now 10 months during the coronavirus health crisis is that we've moved from disaster recovery to business continuity to literally business as usual. And that means you have to be in the business world and in the compliance world incredibly nimble, incredibly agile, and be able to move. And I wanted to use that as an introduction now that we have a change of administration literally at the highest level. Can companies use that same approach that they have to be proactive now, or would you suggest a wait and see approach for companies to prepare for whatever the new administration might bring?
Companies should not fear this rapid uptick in overall corporate enforcement actions. However, they should remain attuned to shifts in the enforcement priorities that will accompany the new administration, and they need to recalibrate risk according to those shifts. That means companies should continue to prioritize the maintenance of their compliance programs during the pandemic. I think over the last year, during 2020, we heard from DOJ and SEC, and they emphasized very clearly that this was their expectation, that the focus remains on maintaining robust compliance programs. So conducting an assessment or a review of the existing compliance program, ensuring it's updated, pressure testing it, would be a very prudent step that companies can take in that direction. As with every compliance program, there are key elements that are particularly important to focus on. So third-party risk management is one. The whistleblower program is another one, and I would say training is the third one. Everything that we talked about, from sanctions to FCPA risks to ESG, the management of third parties and risk associated with third parties is a key area that touches upon all of these areas of risk. So companies have to ensure that they understand the surrounding risks in their supply chain and the third parties. With the disruption that we've had this past year, it's important to take a very pragmatic and systematic approach in managing the risks related to third parties. The whistleblowing programs is the second element. Companies have to make sure that they not only maintain but they strengthen the internal whistleblower programs, and this is especially important with the remote working environment that the whole world has adopted recently, as well as with the various interruptions in international trade and manufacturing that we have seen and logistics around the world. And then finally, training. When it comes to training, more training and more frequent training is better. It is important that the compliance team and senior management receive appropriate training, and that that training and knowledge is cascading down through the rest of the organization. I would finally just mention, based on our earlier discussions in the earlier episodes about the increased focus of DOJ and SEC on insider trading. Companies, public companies specifically, have to ensure that they mitigate this heightened insider trading risk through not only robust and tailored policies and trainings, but they also need to ensure that their disclosures are aligned with guidelines and policies pertaining to ESG.
Shehzana, I really like the way you phrased that we have nothing to fear from this administration, yet you must remain ever vigilant and respond to any regulatory changes that may come up. The other items you mentioned that companies need to do, these have been, I think, part of the landscape for at least the last couple of years. But I was wondering if there are any final thoughts you would like to leave our listeners with.
It is important for companies, as I said, to remain attuned to the shifts in the enforcement landscape, to the shifts in the enforcement priorities, and adapt accordingly. Financial institutions can expect increased regulatory scrutiny. Companies that operate in the oil and gas, mining, and industrial sectors, they should be prepared for potential environmental investigations. So those are some examples of the shifts that they can expect. But for all companies, there are three takeaways. First, as we said, pressure test your compliance program and your risk management framework, and consider the upgrades to keep up with the evolving landscape, enforcement and regulatory landscape. Two, update and increase trainings. And three, line up the appropriate resources. Surround yourself with experienced and knowledgeable legal, advisory, and investigative team in case you need them, so they can help you timely and effectively mitigate and resolve any compliance or other issues you might encounter.
Shehzana, unfortunately, we're in the end of our time for this episode, but I was wondering if our listeners wanted more information on any of the topics we've discussed in this podcast. Where could they go? Please
visit our website at k2integrity.com, and you can also follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Shehzana, I really have appreciated this podcast series, and as we move forward into 2021 and beyond, I hope perhaps I could call upon you and your colleague, Bob Brenner, to maybe see where we might be down the road.
We would love that. Thank you for having us, Tom.
This is Tom Fox again. I hope you've enjoyed this episode in our 5-part podcast series on Integrity Matters, Assessing the Corporate Compliance Climate in 2021, sponsored by K2 Integrity. For more information, you can check out the K2 Integrity website at www.k2integrity.com. I hope you'll join us again for another episode as we continue to explore many of the issues that corporate compliance professionals, practitioners, and corporate compliance functions will face in 2021 and beyond. This podcast series has been a special production of the Compliance Podcast Network.